Welcome to the Living Well and Redefining Aging series. I'm Cameron Segal, and today's segment is all about meaningful engagement in elder care. I'm joined today by two of the most passionate people I know, and two people who have devoted their lives to improving the lives of vulnerable populations. They're immensely talented, and I can't think of anybody else I'd rather have here to talk about meaningful engagement. Tasha Stouffer is Director of Resident Programs at Ethan Allen Residence, and she is in charge of all dementia care education at Living Well Group. Susan Herrick is Certified Music Therapist and Activity Coordinator at Ethan Allen Residence. Tasha, a little background?
Sure, that was quite the intro, Cameron.
I mean it.
So my background is actually in caregiving. I started out as a caregiver working mainly in end-of-life and late-stage dementia care. So my programming experience actually started doing a lot of one-on-one programming. So it wasn't really that big of a transition to then move into group programming and working at the residence.
Susan?
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm so happy to be here with the both of you. I'm a 30-year music therapist, and when I first came out of school, I did what you might call the nursing home circuit. This was back in the 80s, if you will, and engagement really wasn't heard of, but music therapy was starting to tap into this idea that memory and music were a powerful force for the aging population. I played and offered services at all kinds of nursing and elder facilities, and I had a chance to really see the different kinds of care that were going on and the different kinds of systems and cultures that existed. Very, very illuminating. And then I got an opportunity to have a more consistent job at an Alzheimer's Day Treatment Center. Now, what came out of this, perhaps most interestingly, was that it seemed to the caregivers and the families that I had a special gift, because with all the anxiety and things that can happen around aging, there was so much just excitement and remembering and connecting when I brought music. What I wanted to say and did say is that music and memory are really the special gift that is still held within every elder. And that was something that was a joy to tap into. As I segued into the world of education, it was really more of the same. How music taps into the brain in such a powerful way that I could harness it for learning. So this idea of music and memory and tapping into the brain and that bringing about positive experiences, community, connection, and learning, this became just a powerful tool throughout my work. Segueing back into elder care in the 2000s, what a different world. What a different world. And that's where I came to meet the both of you and to really enjoy this new entree into connecting with the individuals. And we'll talk more about that later.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like we could talk about this for a long time, each of us. So yeah. We'll try to do it in 25 minutes or so. So engagement, that's the theme today. And I feel like that's one of those words that we use all the time, but people may not be sure what that means in the sphere of elder care. So Tasha, can you talk a little bit about that?
So in the sphere of elder care, engagement is meaningful, enjoyable, and doable activities. We want people to be connected. That is the big theme, and we want them to connect with their presenter, their volunteer, and then also to connect with each other within that group. And when they're done with their whatever they're doing, whether it's yoga or Tai Chi or an art project or a sing-along with Susan, we want them to feel like they've accomplished something and feel like it's been time well spent, right. First and foremost. Definitely, engagement is very different than entertainment. Entertainment is just somebody sitting and passively just being entertained, and we want them to be an active part of whatever it is that they're doing for an activity, whether it's music or art or exercise or some kind of a social program or spiritual program.
Sure. So yeah, so entertainment has value, but it's not
Sure.
as purposeful. It's not as valuable, when you're trying to elevate an elder. And that's sort of the new age of vital living, is elevating elders.
Right.
So Susan, I know that you could talk forever about it also, but talk about some of like the specific things you do.
Sure,
music therapist.
sure. As a music therapist, you can engage the human being on many different levels in a small group, large group, bedside. You can work with the community, the entire community, and you can also do things like integrate music and arts. So, for example, in the larger community, we have some wonderful people to collaborate with. I'm thinking Music Blooms, music therapy with Marcy Hernandez, and also Margie Beckoff, who's a therapeutic harpist. And there are others. There's a hospice choir. And then on the more small group level, I've done such kind of integration with arts as Mozart and flower arranging. And here's where people who are very inspired by and organized by the music that Mozart composed, and much science is behind this, are at once creating art through flowers. And again, here's a community connection, which is just fabulous, as Chapel's Florist in Williston provides something called the Recycled Flower Program. And so the owner, Diana, said one day, what are all these flowers doing when people don't buy them or when an event is over? And she organized this program that all elder facilities could be tapping into right now in Burlington. And I was fortunate enough to find it. And it is one of the highlights of the Residents Week when they are doing this, because we are tapping into their love of art, their love of color, their love of beautifying their home, and also their love of music, and how, again, that organizes the brain.
Right. So I imagine that the flowers really like makes it more of a home, and like contrast that medical model, that institutionalized model.
Well, so I would like to speak to the purpose part of that. So it is a home-like setting, and the fact that the residents are making these arrangements with Susan and then they're decorating the building or giving them to a friend, that's a meaningful type of engagement that actually serves a purpose. So when somebody has purpose in their life, there's more meaning in general, and it's extremely important as far as quality of life goes.
Right, right. So all this talk about purpose and all that, it's not just abstract, there's actual like data and evidence to isolation, right? So AARP found that 17% of Americans over the age of 65 are isolated due to like geographic barriers, economic barriers, language, or disability, and that 50% of Americans over the age of 65 are economically unstable, which puts them at risk to isolation. So, in care facilities, there's people who are isolated, but even just in the world, there's people who are isolated. The National Health Service in the UK found that social isolation can put you at an increased risk, like 60% increased risk for developing dementia. So that's immensely powerful. And so given those numbers, how impactful it is, it's surprising how recent this like purposeful, vital, aging, person-centered elder care is. I know it's recent. Tasha, can you speak on that a little bit and just go into a little depth about what activity directors look like, what their background is, sort of what they do?
So, yeah, this became a field in the 80s. Prior to the 80s, most people living in community or living in a nursing home or assisted living, it was more of a medical model. So the medical model was treating what? It was treating illness. And now we've moved into a wellness model, which is totally different because it's looking at the whole person and it's about living well. And so this has been a huge shift in the past, what are we looking at, 35 years.
We're still shifting, aren't we?
And still, I mean, overall, very new profession, new area to work. And we are looking at residents very, very differently. So it started off perhaps with, I think, occupational therapists and nurses and recreational therapists, engagement and just activities professionals. There have been activities professionals in the past. They're now certifying. It's becoming more of a legitimate field. And we are recognizing that just meeting basic needs is not enough. It's not enough to just make sure somebody is fed and clean. That's not enough. We need to reach people on a psychosocial level.
Right.
And we need to our particular engagement that we're looking to meet, physical, cognitive, emotional, social, and spiritual. And those are all things that are essential. It's essential to living well.
Right, right. So do you think there's a stigma against, about activity directors,
I do. I think that people in the past, it's all about, you go into a nursing home, what are you doing? You're playing bingo.
Yeah.
And we are not about bingo these days. Does bingo still exist? Sure, bingo can still exist. However, it's a really small portion, and we are really trying to, the movement now is to engage people at a much higher level, engage people in art and music, the therapeutic uses of these tools is essential, especially when somebody is becoming more forgetful.
Right.
Something like music, especially something that Susan also has worked with, is using music with memory. If somebody is, say, walking down a hall and all of a sudden they just stop, that part of the brain, the left part of the brain where you lose language, and that you start to lose that. But the rhythm on the right is an actual different part of your brain that you're using for thinking. And so all of a sudden, if we start to sing a song, that person will start to actually dance and move, and it will get them out of that moment that they're stuck in. So we use music as a tool for not just isolation, but also for anxiety and depression.
Right, right. It seems kind of obvious, right? That music can be this powerful.
It does now, and I don't know if, I mean, obviously it hasn't always seemed obvious. It seems obvious to all of us because this is what we do, and we see it work all the time.
Right.
It's constantly working. We had a resident in pain, and we put on her favorite opera music, and her whole face relaxed. We, if somebody's having an extra anxious moment, we'll put headphones on them and see them visibly relax. So music works.
I love that.
Speaking of which, can you talk a little bit about the project? When I met you, this is the first thing I learned about you. I was fascinated by how you're at that crossroads between the medical model and the wellness model. You're right there with your project that you're working on with Larner College.
Yeah, so I'm the community mentor for the Larner College of Medicine Public Health Department. They do a project every year. It's the Healthy People 2020 project. So I have a team of 7 medical students and then actually 2 residents. It was such a popular idea that somebody joined in who wasn't even going to be involved with it in the beginning. But when we applied for the grant, it was to just bring some people with a human services background to Ethan Allen residence to expand our music program. But it turned into a way to really try to quantify some of those results. So where we are right now, it's early in the process of it, but we're trying to see if music can be used as really a second line of defense for challenging behaviors for our dementia population. So Teepa Snow, who Tasha can talk about a little bit, it's all about approach and reading the individual. So that's the first step to dealing with challenging behavior. So this public health project is trying to see, can music be the second line of defense? When the approach doesn't happen before medication is used, can music be used? And to go into a little bit more depth from what we've talked about, there's tons of studies showing, neuroimaging showing that music reacts exclusively to different neural pathways when compared to regular speech. So for a resident or an elder who has difficulty communicating, is already isolated, really just has these barriers, music could be, I think, and y'all think, everybody thinks here, that it could be a great intervention. So we're looking to really quantify that and add it to the literature so other care facilities can do that, and even not care facilities. When I was doing the research for it, there's all of these studies and case studies about bringing music into people's homes, so not in facilities, and pretty much it's always successful. we may not find that, but I'm hopeful about it. This, like the music being applied, what I'm talking about, really is all about person-centered care. And that, again, like engagement could be one of those things that I'm comfortable using, y'all two are comfortable using. Tasha, can you kind of explain what person-centered means and kind of contrast that to where we've been before?
Right, so before, I mean, again, we've been looking at, we've come from a place where there was this medical model, and now we're in this new world where the population's aging. All of a sudden, the baby boomers are aging, and they're demanding a different level of care. It's they don't want bingo. So the person-centered is, for instance, when somebody comes in to live in community, we would ask a lot of questions to figure out about them and their background. You had mentioned before about Teepa Snow, and Teepa Snow is an occupational therapist who has really perfected an approach, a physical approach in dementia care. And she is all about knowing the person. You can't reach a person until you know them. And these residents are coming to us having lived full and rich lives prior to coming into community, or if you're working at home with a person, they have lived a full and rich life before they become elderly, before they've started to perhaps experience some dementia. And it's really important to know who they are and what made them tick, what brought them joy. And when we're designing programs, we actually think of, as we get to know our residents coming in, one of the best things when we get a new resident is finding out about them, because our programming is about to change. We have one of our residents who moved in within the past few months, was really big into community coordination, and she worked at the multi-generational center here in town, and she was a huge volunteer. And it became very obvious that she was going to need to do some organizing at the residence. So we have a resident circle, which is kind of like a resident council meeting, exactly, where everybody has input and talks about the things that they like, the things that they perhaps would like to see change. And it became obvious that this particular resident really wanted to take an active role. So she has taken that on, and now she's kind of become my personal assistant. And she doesn't hesitate to let me know what's what and what we need to change. And it's been very empowering to her. And that's the goal. We want people to feel empowered.
She wouldn't be able to function if she was just sitting around, I imagine, right?
She wouldn't be happy. She wouldn't have joy, and that's our job.
So I like that. I really like you talk about like designing programs based on resident needs. And outside of facilities, you go to an adult day program, every single person that goes there is going to have to be, a different care plan, different activities needed. Susan, you actually have experience with something like that, relating it to sundowner syndrome.
Right. So, earlier I talked about the different ways you can hold music therapy or hold music therapy interventions, and those being small group, large group, and et cetera. And a lot of times those happen in an environment like, say, a living room of a residence or the community room, and people all go to that place and they have that experience. And that's mostly what you'll find. But, one of the things I like to do is I like to walk around a residence and get my finger on the pulse and go, where are people feeling anxious? Where are people needing some music therapy right where they are? And I started noticing that in the half an hour prior to dinner, this kept happening, that people seemed extra anxious. They didn't want to go off somewhere else because they were waiting to get into that dining hall. They were more agitated. They were getting into little rows with one another. And I understood that this is something, it's attributed to something called sundowners syndrome, which is, it's a time of day where people who have dementia experience greater challenges. And this may lead to wandering, it may lead to looking out the windows, wondering where their car is, needing to go home, things like that. So I thought, how can I bring the music to them? because they're not going to come. They're not going to leave this. There's too much anxiety going on.
Right.
So I found a nearby piano, and I just started to play as background music. And I noticed that a couple people who were in that area who had been very agitated were starting to maybe dance a little with their hands or sing the lyrics to the song because they knew them, or name out the title. And what started to happen then was that other people started to feel engaged by that. Like, oh, they're doing something. That has meaning. And so what ultimately has started to happen, because I've done this over many weeks now, is it's become, the family sing-along. And people say, can I come in, around to the piano, and can we be around the piano and so it's not something that I made up and said, you guys come to this, because I know it'll be good for you. Science shows this will be good for you. No, I said, what do you need? What do these folks need right now? And started to create something that would draw them into the experience and out of the anxiety that they were feeling. So, and then just a last little bit to this, there was a couple that came in recently, and she started to tell me about how their family would have sing-alongs around the piano every Saturday. And so their enthusiasm has even amped it up further. So I couldn't have thought that up.
Right.
That's not something I could have made up. That came out of what does this environment, this group, in this time need.
But that's what a clinician is supposed to do.
Correct.
Is adapt, right?
Well, in this new model.
Exactly.
In this new model.
And it is
Exactly.
person-centered that way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about music because we're lucky enough to have Susan with us today.
Yeah.
Thank you. However, I will say we also have a whole lot of other things going on. Gardening is so important, and we've been lucky enough to work with Vermont Community Garden Network here in town, and Hands with Megan Humphrey, which is helping and nurturing diverse seniors.
What does a garden program activity look like?
So
right?
Great question. So typically it would be thinking, what are the elders doing? Just kind of watching. Well, we actually bring things in. We're making pesto out of basil and spreading it on crackers. We're making bird feeders. We're doing all kinds of, we'll make an herbed butter with the residents, with the herbs that we snip. We'll make a tomato salad. So everybody's very engaged in smelling the smells and seeing the beautiful colors and making flowers from the garden. At times we'll make arrangements when Susan's not doing her musical arrangements.
Well, there's a sense of ownership to the vegetables
There
too,
is,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. So the residents will, gather big bowls of vegetables and take them directly to our chef, who's then cooking. So there's, again, purpose in that and feeling of contribution, which is so important.
Right.
Incredibly important. And then in addition to the gardening, we have lots of art classes. Art is key. Movement is key. We have some kind of yoga or movement happening daily. It's really important to keep everybody moving.
Right, yeah. And it's kind of obvious, right?
It seems obvious, it does.
Senior centers are doing that more. They've got bone builders classes,
Yep.
Tai Chi,
Correct.
Qigong. I mean, people are doing it. People may not know about it. So.
Right.
Susan, you're obviously a very creative person. Talk to me a little bit about bringing creativity and creative programming and humor to an elder's life, and specifically in a facility, right? Because that's what we're experts on right now. So.
Yeah. Well, part of the beauty of humor is, or part of what allows humor to come out is really knowing a person. And so that's the first step. You really know somebody, because face it, if you bring out humor and you don't know somebody, you could risk, insulting them or something like that. So, but it's been fun to say, I bring my little puppety in, Zippity is his name. My puppety named Zippity Doodah, and I picked that name because it has whimsy to it, and every time I step up to an elder with my little 6-pound Morkie, it's Zippity Doodah, and they're right there, and they go, what was his name? And I go, Zip, and they go, Itty Doodah. What was his name? Zip, Itty Doodah, but in any case.
Really quickly, these are residents who don't talk really oftentimes,
exactly.
Right? I mean, so that's really,
Exactly.
it's to
Right.
people who are listening, that may just be somebody's learned response, but it's
It's
people who
humor.
have communication
It's humor that
difficulties.
allowed them.
Right.
And so finally, the performative aspect, who thinks of elders performing? right? And so I'm working at a performance now where they're going to be performing some humorous songs and things like that. And it's a much easier way to get into performing, and performing really uses our brain.
Right. I love that.
So I know
Any last points?
Well, we have a few minutes left. I just want to say quickly that all of our employees, the minute that they come in the door in orientation, understand that we want them to take time to engage and spend time with elders. Susan had recently broke her wrist this past weekend, and our head housekeeper, Heather, actually stepped up, called me and said, what do I do? We need to keep people engaged. And next thing you know, she was doing a balloon toss, she was playing music, she was doing everything she could to keep taking folks on walks. And the culture is important in a residence. Everybody has to have buy-in that this engagement matters and is meaningful. And I feel lucky to work with all of you in that.
Yes, and that point really epitomizes the person-centered approach
Correct.
versus the institutional
Correct.
medicalized model.
That's right.
I appreciate y'all two coming on here and talking with me.
Yeah, thank
and
you.
Educating our audience.
Thanks,
And
Cameron.
hopefully we can do it again.
Great.
Thank you, Cameron, Tasha.
Thank you.